Hello and welcome to another episode of the Identity Navigator. This is your host, Rohit. So, for the past few weeks, we have been talking about cloud, and I thought it would be great to change things up and talk about something different today. It has been extremely hot in New Jersey where I live, so I thought I'll bring something cool. A few weeks back, I posted on social media and asked the vendors in our space to reach out to me if they would like to showcase their product on the podcast. The conditions were simple. It is not a paid promotion, but an opportunity. And I will speak my mind to preserve the integrity of the podcast. I would send them a questionnaire, but at the same time, do my own research, reach out to the contacts that I have in the market to really understand what their product offerings are and give you my unbiased opinion based upon that. Based on the responses that I received, there were a few people and products who really stood out. These were fantastic people to work with and had a great product. Now, doing a research paid podcast is very time consuming, but getting an opportunity to work with people who are as passionate about IAM as you and me makes it all worth it. So one of the person who reached out to me was Gal Helmsky. I'm pretty sure I'm really butchering her last name and I hope she doesn't mind. Now, she has more than 30 years of experience and is also a co-founder and chief product officer of a multi-million dollar company. At first, I thought it would be one of the marketing people or her executive assistant reaching out to me. But it was really her, and she was an amazing partner to work with. Now, she's obviously knowledgeable with her being a co founder, but also she was equally passionate about the products and this space, like you and me, who are spending our free time creating and listening to a podcast about identity and access management. Like Taylor Swift doesn't exist and we can't be all listening to her songs. But here we are listening to this podcast. So let's talk about a very relevant problem that I have seen. It's policy based access control. And how is PlainID solving this problem? So let's start from the basics. What is authorization? In IAM, we often talk about three things, right? Identity, authentication, and authorization. So identity sets the ground to who the user is, their characteristics, and so on. For example, Joe is a sales manager working in the North District. Identity typically handles the life cycle management of users, including onboarding, role changing, and offboarding, or commonly referred to as JML or joiner movers and leavers. Authentication, also called as authn, is about verifying the identity and keeping it verified for the duration of the session. For example, Joe has provided an ID and password or fingerprint, so it's him. Authorization or auth is about what the user can do, what the user can access. For example, Joe, remember Joe, he's our sales manager. Joe can view and manage accounts of his district. Joe can access the CRM system and the ERP system, but what can Joe do in the CRM or ERP systems? This will not be answered by just an access decision. So authorizations are responsible for managing and controlling identities access to digital assets. Now, what are these digital assets? Digital assets could be an application object, it could be a module or application controls, it could be an API or a service, it could be a data record or part of data, and it can be an infrastructure related assets such as a server, a database. You got the gist. Access is a partial part of OZ and relates to the ability to use an application or a service. Access covers high level authorizations, sometimes mentioned as coarse grained. But we need to also look into the fine grained authorization. What does it mean? Let's understand it with an example. Consider a healthcare system where different healthcare professionals need varying level of access to patient records based upon their roles, the sensitivity of the data, and some other attributes. So a doctor may have fine-grained access control where they can view all medical records of patients that are assigned to treat. They can also update medical notes but cannot modify billing information. A nurse may have access to only specific sections of patient records, such as the vital signs and medication history for the patients they are responsible for. They cannot access diagnostic reports or billing information. An administrative staff may have access to patient billing information but are restricted from viewing medical records unless explicitly authorized for specific admin purposes. So in this scenario, fine-grained authorization allows administrators to define access controls based not just on rules, rule-based access control, but also on specific attributes like patient assignments, data sensitivity, like medical versus billing, and contextual factors, purposes of access. Let's look at an example for coarse-grained authorization so that we can compare and contrast. Now, let's consider a content management system used in corporate environment. So content contributors have access to create, edit, and delete contents across various sections of the company's intranet. They have broad access to all content creation tools but do not have admin privileges. Editors can review and publish content across different departments but are restricted from accessing the admin backend of the CMS or the content management system. Administrators have full access to all features and setting of the content management system, including user management, site configurations, and analytics. So in this example, the access controls are primarily role based or coarse grained, where each role has predefined permissions that encompasses broad categories of action within the CMS. The system does not differentiate between specific content types or individual pieces of content, but rather assign permission based upon users' roles. So, in summary, fine grained authorization involves detailed access controls based on specific attributes, content, contexts, or conditions. It provides precise control over who can access what resources under what circumstances. Coarse-grained authorization offers broad access controls based on user roles or generalized categories of resources or action. It simplifies access management but may not provide the same level of granularity as fine-grained authorization. Both fine-grained and coarse-grained authorization strategies are valuable depending on the security requirements, complexities of the system, and specific use cases, which we can term as business requirements within an organization. Often, a combination of these approaches, or mostly, I've always seen a combination of these approaches, is used to balance security needs with operational efficiency. We did an episode about role based access control, right? So a role-based access control is a form of coarse-grained authorization because it operates at a level where permissions are assigned to roles and users are then assigned to those roles. It simplifies access management by grouping users and permissions into roles, making it easier to administrate, but less granular compared to fine-grained authorization approaches like attribute based access control. Now, policy based access control is typically associated with fine grained authorization, and that is the focus of our podcast today. What is expected from an authorization solution? There are several areas that the authorization should address. The most important is the business orientation. Authorizations by nature are business oriented. Who can access which document and when? The business owner of the data or resource is the one who should determine who is authorized for it. For example, only the HR manager who is responsible for the employee's data can determine who can access which employee and what extent of data will be viewed. But authorization management today has very technical orientations, and this is where it fails at so many places, or it's substandard at so many places. This is because it is typically managed by technical people. The business owner has no visibility into who is able to see and do within his domain of responsibility. Another area that authorization should address is simplicity and agility. So, managing and enforcing authorization for a new application, platform, or system should be easy and should be fast. There are so many changes in an average enterprise that if it's not simple enough, that it just won't happen. An average enterprise implements around 40 new apps or system in a year. That doesn't count the movement to the cloud. The lack of simplicity in authorization management and control led organizations to employ a large group of authorization managers that manually updates the authorization in the applications and systems. Another key requirement is dynamism. Authorizations are responsible for the decision who can do what in the app, who can use which resource and data. So it should be a smart decision, a decision that can consider any relevant information. For example, what is the time from where the user is accessing, what just happened in the system, what just happened in the organization, is the organization under cyber attack. Most applications or systems today use static based authorization mechanisms. That means that the decision of who gets to see and use what was made 2 hours ago, yesterday, or the week before. Visibility. Authorization should be visible at all time for an organization. Answering the question who can do what, who can use what, should be possible easily whenever needed. Another level of this ability is answering who has used or done what and when. There is a high demand in most organizations for those answers, but gaining them require a lot of investigation, many technical employee involvement, and yet not always all the answers are gained. Another must have attribute for an authorization system is modernization. Traditional boundaries are failing. Most have already moved on or are talking about moving to the cloud and implementing more mobile based solutions. In addition, there is a change in the on premise technology, either by adopting private or public cloud or most advanced technologies. The authorization technology in those platforms also changed. What was once good for the legacy solution doesn't always work that well now. The authorization should support the movement from a repository based to a virtual token based, from static to dynamic, so that it can access the modernization of the data center. The next attribute of an authorization system should be it should be able to provide who requires access to data and resources. It could be people, device, service, or things like Internet of Things, most solution today supports a single user management, preventing the organizations from having a single view of all that can use a specific resource or data. So in short, the system should be able to support numerous identity types and shouldn't just focus on user as an identity type. Or I've seen most of them use either users or some platforms like databases, and that is where the buck stops. And that's just not good enough. You need to identify the identities or the type of identities across your enterprise and then see if your policy based access control or your authorization system supports these identities, and if yes, how, right? So the three pillars for an authorization is the administration. So you should have a clarity on what the policy is. It should be able to validate and test. You should be able to carry out analysis. It should have a governance controls over it. It should have a decision, which is like a flexible data module. You should be able to make smart decisions. It should use advanced technologies like a graph database, just so that it can keep up to the pace. It can ensure that the requirements around the response time are met. And then enforcement, coarse grained to fine grained, and multiple standards support like OPA and XAML and some of the others that we will talk about. So, who are you and what can you do has always been a challenge in the digital space. While the who are you question has been addressed by many vendors, what can you do and see, that fine print still remains hard to solve and convoluted. Now, you can tell me that we have it under control, but the control that I have seen at most places is in terms of technology. So an IT team can probably tell as to who can access this database. But when it comes to business, for example, the list of documents, the the business owned digital assets, it's very hard to answer what can you do and see. The most interesting problem for me to solve in this complexity is the control points along the way. So consider a user's digital journey. The user starts by authenticating, that's could be called as an IDP or an identity provider control. Then they move through the network. You will have a network or a SASE control. Then they access the application, which will bring in the application controls. Then they will continue with API or services, which would be the APIs or microservices control. And eventually the user reaches the data, which will have data controls. Now, best practices tell us to have those controls along the way, achieve trust at every point. But all those controls are distributed. Like this is the entire concept of zero trust. And that is why zero trust needs to be a holistic determination or a strategy across the enterprise. It cannot work in silo. You cannot have just a zero trust strategy and ask independent technology teams to implement their part and then say that we have zero trust, right? Because we just spoke about the different level of controls. But so you achieve trust at every point. But these controls are distributed, segmented, and uncorrelated. Bottom line is, it is very challenging to manage and control. And also think about the response time hit or the user experience part of it when these controls are implemented at every place and these controls are distributed and uncorrelated. So accelerating application development while shifting security and assurance left in the development lifecycle is essential. One of the most critical component of application security is access control. So while traditional access control mechanisms such as role-based access control, ACLs or access control lists are still prevalent, policy-based access control is gaining momentum. PBAC is more powerful and flexible access control model, allowing developers to apply any combination of coarse, medium, and fine-grained access control over resource and data within an application. Right? So we spoke a lot about authorization. Let's speak about what is policy-based access control. PBAC is an access control model that uses permissions expressed as policies to determine who can access what within an application. Administrators and developers can define application access statically where the access is based on users and groups defined by roles and responsibilities. On the other hand, developers can set up runtime or dynamic authorizations at any time to apply access controls at the time when a user attempts to access a particular application resource. Runtime authorizations takes in attributes of application resources such as contextual elements like time or location to determine what access should be granted or denied. This combination of policy types make policy-based access control a more powerful authorization engine. A central policy store and policy engine evaluates these policies continuously in real time to determine access to resources. PBAC is a more dynamic access control model as it allows developers and administrators to create and modify policies according to their needs, such as defining custom roles within an application or enabling secure delegated authorizations. Developers can use PBAC to apply role and attribute based access controls across many different type of applications such as customer facing web application, an internal workforce application, a multi-tenant software as a service application, an edge device access, and many more. So PBAC brings together RBAC and ABAC, which have been the two most widely used access control models for the past couple of decades. So, before we try and understand how to modernize this or implement this, let's understand how developers implement it in a traditional development process. So, typically, developers would hard code access control into each and every application. This creates four primary challenges. First, you need to update code every time to update access control policies. Now, we all know that that is probably not the best idea. It is time consuming, it has the dependencies on the developer, and it is done at the expense of working on the business logic of the application. Second, you need to implement these permissions in each and every application that you build. Third, application audits are challenging. You need to run a battery of tests or dig through thousands of lines of code spread across multiple files to demonstrate who has access to application resources. For example, providing evidence to audits that only authorized users can access a patient's health record, where an access policy is hard coded within the application code, is very time consuming effort. And obviously, developing hard coded application access control is time consuming, and most importantly, this is error prone. You must have heard the term policy as code, right? And this is where I believe PBAC trumps ABAC, because it is very hard to write unit test cases for an attribute based access control. Uh, when we write policy as code, it is easy to write unit test cases, but I digress. So, coming back to the topic at hand, you would have guessed that we can simplify this process by externalizing access controls from the application code to a central policy store within the service. Now, when a user tries to take an action in your application, you call the policy store to check if it is authorized. Policy admins can respond faster to changing business requirements as they no longer need to depend on the development team when updating access controls. They can use a central policy store to make updates to authorization policies. This means that developer can focus on the core application logic and access control policies can be created, customized and managed separately or collectively across applications. Developers can use PBAC to define authorization rules for users, user groups, or attributes based on the entity type accessing the application. Restricting access to data and resource using PBAC protects against unintended access to application resources and data. PBAC can be integrated in the application development process in several ways. We can begin by defining or the developers should begin by defining an authorization model for their application and use this to describe the scope of authorization request made by the application and the basis for evaluating the requests. So, so summarize the discussion that we have had so far. PBAC is a more flexible access control authorization model that enables fine-grained access control over a resource in an application. By externalizing access control from the application code, PBAC simplifies the application development process and reduces the risk of security vulnerabilities in the application. PBAC also offers flexibility, aligns with compliance mandates, uh, and developers and administrators benefit from this centralized permission across various stages of the DevOps process. So, by adopting PBAC in an app development, organizations can improve their security and better align with industry regulations. By externalizing authorizations and centralizing policy management and administration, developers can align their application access with zero trust principles. By implementing least privilege and continuous verification within applications. So, for all of you out there who are working on zero trust strategy and implementations across your enterprise, PBAC needs to be a part of it. And security and audit teams can better analyze and audit who has access to what within an application. Now, we have defined the problem so far. Hopefully, we understand what PBAC is. Hopefully, we understood what the challenges were. We have also defined what are the pillars that every good solution must have. Let's look into the solution now. So, this is a vendor in the space called as PlainID. I've evaluated them against everything that I just spoke about, and I have to say that they were pretty exceptional. Also, this is not a paid podcast. In policy based access control, devil is in the details. How do you write the policy? How easy it is for the business to write the policy? How easy it is for a certifier to understand the policy? What's the response time when a decision is being made? To get the attributes based upon which a decision is made, how easy it is to integrate the policy engine or the decision point to the systems from which the attributes are being fetched. How well does this supporting IAM tool integrates with the sale points and cyber arcs of the world? How well does it play in your IAM ecosystem? And PlainID does these simple things very, very well, right? So it's not just about the packaging, it's about how they have engineered the solution and how it works in a real environment has been very impressive. A little bit about PlainID. It was founded by experts in security and the IAM space. They uh, worked in IAM focused companies, implemented multiple projects, and then they identified an authorization gap and decided to make this as the focus of their company. PlainID today is the market leader in authorization and PBAC management. They have more than 100 enterprise level companies that are utilizing their solution and securing their most valuable applications and data. What I absolutely loved was they are also offering a SaaS based solution. Uh, just for reference, it is available in 5 different data centers worldwide. So it is designed to support the performance, scalability, redundancy, and security of an enterprise level organization. Because remember, PBAC, the devil is in the details. It is very complex and it needs to be very responsive, very agile of how that engineering of the tool has been carried out. And that is why so many of the homegrown solution fails. PlainID's comprehensive authorization platform offers a complete authorization solution in the market today. So their main capabilities are business approach to authorization. So PlainID has recognized the need to support both business and technical. So a business oriented language is required to clearly define user access rights and permission in a way that it can be easily described, approved, and certified. And the tech side should be flexible enough to support what the application or platform requires in order to enforce the right access. To do this, PlainID presents the business owners with a graphical view of the authorization decisions, rules, and the connection between them to identities rather than traditional technical language. In addition, a broad set of API offers the flexibility the technology requires to create their own dashboards or whatever they need with that data. It is a pretty enterprise ready solution. So it offers the full set of capabilities required to efficiently manage the life cycle of authorizations. Because hey, we are not solving for payback. That is a solution. We are solving for the authorization challenges, and that is how we need to look into this. Who can access my data? Right? That is the problem that we are essentially solving. We don't have to implement payback. Payback is just a way to solve that authorization problem. So when we look at this solution from the lens of authorization, they do some things very well, which is, and I think we spoke about it, policy as code. So policies can easily be transformed to a standard policy code, which is Rego based for those who are interested, enabling dev and engineers to work with them as they are accustomed to. Lifecycle management of authorization policies uh, to allow full or controlled lifecycle management. So starting with lower environment, testing and controlled deployment in a higher environment. Another impressive feature that I found was delegated management and SOD controls. So management of policies and policy building blocks can be delegated to different stakeholders, enabling an efficient management process and separation of duties where needed. Real-time authorization. So an advanced rule engine is used to calculate the authorizations, time, location, event, risk level, and any other attribute can influence the authorization a specific entity is granted while accessing the app. Analytics and insights, like any good enterprise solution, PlainID does offer full visibility into the effect of each policy and any of the policy building blocks. So these analytics answers questions such as who are the identities included in the policy, what application it affects, what are the assets a user can access, and much more. So, and then universal authorization support. PlainID prides themselves into speaking both the languages of the business and technology. So PlainID separates the business logic, the authorization policy from the technical implementation, thus enabling user or distribution of same policy to various consumers. So in addition, PlainID can answer with some same policies to different authorization requests or different access patterns, keeping consistency of answers across the various apps. It does support all industry leading standards like REST and ZOT and OAuth and XAML uh, or XACML as some of you would say it. And in addition to adaptive integration with leading vendors such as AWS. Right. So remember the questions that we need to answer. Who are the identities? What is being accessed? And when is the access valid? And based upon all this, who, what, and on what resource, and when, from where, based upon all of this, an access decision is being made, right? So, who are the identities which are represented by attributes? These attributes are fetched from IDPs or identity providers. Then there are assets. They are like, what is being accessed. So an asset can be medical records. It could be a student record for a university or a school system. So representation of the asset should include the attributes for making access decisions. And then we have the when, the conditions which are like environmental attributes. For example, policies can be built to give or restrict access based upon the days of the week or time of the day, location, events, and more. And then where, who gets the response the policy can produce, you know, like where this policy statement can be carried out. So, in terms of architecture, policy based access control systems, or most of them that I have seen, have pretty standard architecture. Most, if not all of them, have a policy administrator point, right? So, this is where a business user can manage the life cycle of the policies. It could be policy creation or managing, testing, version control, and things like this. Remember, everybody does it. You have to determine who does it based on your requirements. Another architectural thing would be the policy decision point. So, this is responsible to calculate the required access decision, right? So, the PlainID PDP is designed to support different access patterns that provide both flexibility for the application and consistency with the defined policies. Think about this in terms of every tool will have PDP. You need to think about the scale and the performance when it comes to PDPs. The policy information point are the sources of attribute used by the policy decision, right? So your policy decision engine might need to require okay, what is the rule the user have, or what is the group the user have, or anything else, right? And it can fetch that from some systems, and those systems are called policy information points. The good thing for the plain ID that the policy information points are mapped by a virtualization layer that enables usage of multiple sources at the same time, including virtual and API based sources. And then there is policy enforcement points. The enforcement points, or the PEP, enforces policy decisions in response to an access request. So the PEP can be implemented within an application or as an external component that stands before the application or data. Right? So this would always be the major components of, or the major components of the architecture of any policy based access control system. What you need to look into is, when you are looking at the PAP or the administration point, understand how well can you author the policies. Can you author a coarse grained policy? Can you author a fine grained policy? Identify what are your policy lifecycle management and version control functionalities within the platform. Identify how do you write policy as code. Can you write unit test cases on top of them? Identify, can you do policy simulations? What other investigations can you do on top of it? Understand audits and insights, and all of them is being provided by PlainID today. For policy decision point, understand the same things. Uh, then you have your policy information point. What can it integrate with? Can it integrate with an LDAP system, or a SQL system, or a SCIM system, or a REST system? Right? One of the better things that I have identified about PlainID was the PlainID authorizers. So while providing a business oriented platform for central management, the PlainID authorization platform extends its reach across the technical stack using PlainID authorizers. Right? So think of them as connectors. The PlainID authorizers are out of the box integration to control authorizations at the different target destinations across all layers. So say for example, you have an API gateway, right? And you need to have a decision or authorization decision made on that API gateway, right? PlainID has got something for a PlainID authorizer or a plugin to integrate with an application gateway, right? You wanted to connect to a database, and at the database level, an authorization decision needs to be made. So PlainID has an authorizer for that. So look at the full list of PlainID authorizers. I believe that is a pretty slick ecosystem, and I hope you like it, and uh, I hope it solves your business case. Okay. Now, IAM is already product heavy, so it was worthwhile to understand how does PlainID work with companies already invested in products like SailPoint and Savient and CyberArk. Right? So they have a pretty good ecosystem when it comes to integrating with most of the IGA tools today. Uh, Even with the PAM tool, most PAM products rely on Active Directory groups or internal authorization systems to make those decisions. Uh, However, in both the cases, the authorization decisions are static, need to be maintained manually. So integration between PAM and PlainID could provide dynamic adaptive access to resources based on a flexible attribute-based policy. I did speak to them about their cost licensing. So they offer a subscription-based pricing module that is based on number of identities. Uh, They have multiple options with regards to total cost of ownership. Since their solution is SaaS with an option of hybrid components, you can choose how your deployment and maintenance would look like. All hybrid components are offered as microservices and fit and should fit into your custom native deployment pipeline. For IM practitioners, it's very important to be able to play around with the tool and skill up. Also, for long-term success with a tool without increasing total cost of ownership multifolds, you would need your team to get skill up, right? So I'll put some docs in. They do have some good docs. I will put a location for the doc, their dev portal, their integration hub, and some of their knowledge base, which could be used to skill up. I also looked into some of their customers uh, and some of the case studies. They have some big customers, and customer ranges all the way from uh, a greenfield implementation of policy-based access control to removal of a legacy PBAC model, which was homegrown. So they have been successful in doing that. In terms of competitors, there are some of open source projects. Then we have AWS and Okta. AWS verified permission is obviously picking up. Axiomatics is another one who provides them pretty stiff conversation. Their website is plainid.com. I will put the link into the show's description so that you have it. So to end, IAM is now more than ever before. It is responsible for the overall security of the enterprise organization. And that includes not just understanding, controlling who the user is, but also with equal importance what the user can do and see. And this is a gap today. And due to complexity, can be addressed only by the policy based approach. An approach that decouples management from enforcement, allowing each part to grow and provide its unique strengths. PlainID is undoubtedly solving a very relevant and complex problem. They are definitely in to face some stiff competition with AWS verified permissions, Axiomatics, and few other vendors. When it comes to PBAC, the complexity is in business logic, how our policy is written, economy of scale, and how seamless this transition from authentication to authorization is. PlainID seems to do it well. Their current offering has most of the checkboxes checked. Their CPO has good vision, and they have a great sales and marketing team. Overall, I'm excited about their future and really happy to see as to how they have positioned themselves in the market. With that said, you can always let me know your thoughts, reach out to me via LinkedIn, or you can email me at theidentitynavigator@gmail.com. Thank you all for your feedback and reviews for the last episode. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the podcast. Until next time, this is Rohit, your identity navigator.